What would you say if I told you that D2 knife steel is actually one of the most underrated and underappreciated knife steels that you can find? How's it going, everybody? I'm Rollshambo, the connoisseur and collector of all things sharp and shiny. And welcome to Steel Snobs, the series where I aim to educate and inform on the different knife steels out there. You see, the problem is that there is a lot of information out there and it's extremely mind-numbing. You go on Google, you type in the search bar for your knife steel, and you're met with a gigantic list of metal elements and tiny percentages that you can't understand. So I aim to actually break it down in a way that's easy to understand and easy to digest. Today, we're talking about D2 steel because every time I post a video about a knife that contains D2, I get lots of comments from keyboard warriors and armchair experts that are ready to tell me and educate me on just how bad D2 steel really is, when in fact, that couldn't be farther from the truth. You see, while I might not be a metallurgist or expert on knife metals, Dr. Larrin Thomas is. He actually has a doctorate in metallurgy, and he is someone that is widely considered an authority on the subject. So I went ahead and went to his website and scoured it for all the information that I could to bring you the facts, because today we're not going to operate in opinions, we're going to operate in the truth. And if you've been wondering how I did this, make sure to stay till the end because I might just end up sharing the same tool with you. Let's talk about D2 knife steel and just how good it actually is. Let's start off by talking about the origins of D2. D2 is an ingot-based steel that was developed in the late 1800s and patented in the early 1900s. It wasn't until about World War II that it really became popularized, and it was used to make machining dies to stamp out other softer steels. So D2 was used almost exclusively in the manufacturing efforts during the war effort. It wasn't until much later in the 1960s that it first started being used for knife making. Now, as far as D2 is concerned, how are we going to do the comparisons? Well, I went ahead and built a spreadsheet based on the information found on knifesteelnerds.com. I created this spreadsheet so it can be filtered by steel, by toughness, by edge retention, by its corrosion resistance, and it goes a little bit like this. These ratings are from 1 upwards of 12 depending upon the category. The highest score that Larrin Thomas gave for toughness is 10, and the highest score that he gave for edge retention was 12, and then for corrosion resistance it was also 10. So keep that in mind. Also keep in mind as well that when it comes to these knife steels, properties are often a bit of a trade-off. For example, a steel that has high edge retention does not always have the highest of toughness, because typically the higher edge retention steels end up being a little more brittle and less tough. Vice versa, a knife that has excellent toughness might not do that well as far as edge retention is concerned. There is no steel out there that is the best of everything. So there's always a bit of a trade-off. Now, for D2 specifically, if we were to go ahead and filter by D2, it's rated at 3.5 for toughness, 5 for edge retention, and 4.5 for corrosion resistance. Now, these numbers don't necessarily mean anything without that additional context of what does it really stack up against. So there's a couple different ways that we can look at this. If we wanted to see, for example, what it compares up against, we could do so by looking at it categorically. So if we wanted to see how well D2 stacks up against other steels, we can in fact change the filters to show exactly what steels have similar or less toughness. To do that, we're going to allow all of the steels to be shown, and we're going to go to toughness, and we're going to uncheck everything that isn't at that 3.5 level or lower. Here's all the steels that have the same toughness or less. That includes 15V Maximit Rex 121, ZDP 189, ZMax 154cm, 440A, 440C, BD1N, M390, M398, N690, S110V, S125V, S60V, and S90V. So on the toughness scale, it's actually not alone as far as how tough the steel is, and that honestly shouldn't be surprising because it is, again, a tool steel. Now, toughness is just one of those properties, so let's go ahead and check it against edge retention. For edge retention, D2 is rated at a 5. Now, edge retention is one of the stronger properties of D2, but many people don't necessarily understand what other steels it performs like with edge retention. Edge retention is all about how long can it maintain its ability to cut while it's in a cut. So if we were to go ahead and filter out everything from 5 or lower, here's what we would find. For edge retention, it's actually quite a long list of steels that D2 is just as good, if not better than, and that list includes 3V, 4V, A2, CPM Crewwear, M2 Z-Tough, 14C28N, 154cm, 420, 440A, and 440C, ABL, Oz 8 and 8CR13 MOV, BD1M, CPM 154, LC200N, MagnaCut, N690, Nitro V, S35VN, Super Gold 2, and VG10. So all of these steels are steels that the edge is going to perform very similar, if not better than all of these steels. For example, CPM 154 is a steel that a lot of people really like. D2 actually has better edge retention than that. It also has better edge retention than 440C, M2, 4V, 3V, and has the same kind of edge retention as CPM Crewwear. Now, if we were to go ahead and take a look at the corrosion resistance, this tends to be one of the weaker spots for D2. A lot of people are concerned with the fact that D2 is not a true stainless. It is in fact considered a semi-stainless, which means that it does have some stainless properties, but it's not fully corrosion resistance. D2 is going to come in at 4.5 on the corrosion resistance rating scale. So let's go ahead and check that out. So for corrosion resistance, it's going to score better than 10V, 15V, 4V, A2, CPM M4, K390, M2, Rex 121, Rex 45, Vanadis 80, Vanadis 8, and ZMax. It also has about the same corrosion resistance as Maximit. So I guess what I'm getting at here is on a categorical level, there are plenty of steels that it outperforms or performs just like. And the list that I've shown have filtered to all of those steels. I don't think that I've ever once encountered someone claiming that they don't want Rex 121 because of its toughness or lack thereof, or that they don't want Maximit because of its lack of corrosion resistance. It seems to me like we're making a lot of excuses for why we don't like D2, when in reality, it really comes down to we're just tired of the steel. We're tired of seeing it. We get community fatigue because we see it so often. The other reason why I think that D2 is often demonized in more budget-friendly knives is that it really depends on how well it was heat treated. You see, what happened was a lot of these budget-friendly companies that make these budget-friendly knives, they got a hold of D2. And as it turns out, D2, with its great edge retention, is really hard on machinery. I remember once upon a time, I had a conversation with the owner of Skyraider Knives, and I asked him why he used A2 instead of D2 when it came to the steel. And he said that he tried D2, and by following the proper heat treat protocols, properly heat treated D2 would actually ruin his machinery at a rate that was not acceptable. Now, that's an example from a small American-made shop. It's not to say that the manufacturing prowess and process isn't out there. Many companies have proven that they can do a good job with their heat treat protocols. Companies like companies like Bestech, companies that we know and trust. The important thing is that if you want to get the results that are shown on this sheet, you have to get a knife that is properly heat treated. If it's not within the optimal heat treat range for D2, which happens to be between 58 and 61, then of course it's not going to perform as well. However, I have yet to come across a single person who can give me any kind of evidence that D2 isn't actually a pretty decent steel other than, well, I heard this, or, well, it's hard to sharpen. The ironic part about that is, you know what else is hard to sharpen? M390, because it also has a decent amount of edge retention. In fact, if we were to go ahead and reset all of these filters so that we could see absolutely everything, M390 is going to score a 6.5. Which is only 1.5 higher than D2. Now, D2's biggest deal is edge retention, but so is M390. And if we were to look at M390 and D2, it's not that big of a stretch to see why D2 used to be M390. They both are mediocre when it comes to toughness, and they're both actually pretty good when it comes to edge retention, and people complain about sharpening both. Now, with that being said, the big leap that M390 makes over D2 is going to come in the form of corrosion resistance. Corrosion resistance for M390, by contrast, is a 9. About twice as much as what we get D2 rated at for corrosion resistance. However, when it comes down to something like that, you can mitigate the corrosion resistance or lack thereof by just oiling your blade. Getting a blade that has a protective coating, whether that be a PVD coating or a Cera coating or a titanium coating. There's a lot of things that you can do to actually increase the corrosion resistance of D2 or of knives in general. So what I'm getting at here is that I believe that we have just been misjudging D2, because not only is it just as good or better than all of those steels that I showed you for those different categories, it's just a steel that has not been heat treated properly for far too long, and it's given the steel a bad name. So when I show a knife and people say stuff like, oh, I like it, but it's in D2, it makes me wonder, how much do they really know about how good D2 is? Would they demonize ZDP 189 for its lack of toughness? Or Maximit for its lack of corrosion resistance? I think that these are questions worth answering. And the question they should be asking instead is, how good was the heat treat protocol that the manufacturer did when they made this knife? At the end of the day, only you can decide what properties are most important to you in your knife steel. Let me know what those properties are in the comment section down below, and make sure to like and subscribe if you want to see more Steel Snobs content. And also make sure to let me know if you would like for me to make this steel rating list, made by me but powered by Laren Thomas, available to the public. I'm Rollshambo. I'll catch you on the flip side.